He had everything: wealth, silence, and a past too painful to speak of. She had nothing but a threadbare coat, a hungry baby, and a question whispered at the edge of desperation. "May I have your leftovers, please?" What happened next didn't just change one life. It rewrote 3 destinies. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and like the video. Plus, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Make sure to watch this video till the end, because in the final moments you'll see the journey from an entirely new perspective. Now let's jump into the story. The rain tapped softly against the windows of the veranda, a quiet and elegant bistro nestled between tall city buildings. Inside, golden lamps cast a warm glow on white tablecloths, and the soft sound of piano music floated through the air like a memory. At a table in the far corner, a man named Miles Harwood sat alone. He wasn't just any man. Once a famous architect, Miles had designed buildings in cities across the world. His name used to appear in magazines and on award plaques, but all of that had been 10 years ago, before the fire, before he lost his wife, Claire, and their little girl, Rose. Since that terrible night, Miles had become a shadow of himself. He lived in silence. No friends, no parties, no joy. Only quiet dinners at restaurants where no one dared to speak too loudly. Tonight, like many others, he ordered his favorite dish, rosemary chicken with garlic potatoes. It arrived on a fancy white plate, steaming and fragrant, but he didn't touch it. He stared at the food, eyes unfocused, like it wasn't even there. He wasn't really hungry. He rarely was these days. His silver hair was combed neatly, his jacket pressed, his posture straight, but inside, everything had crumbled. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, may I have your leftovers, please?" It was soft, trembling, but clear enough to break through the hush of the room. Miles blinked and turned his head, surprised. Standing beside his table was a young woman. She looked no older than 20, maybe less. Her blonde hair was tied in a loose bun with pieces falling over her tired face. A baby was cradled in her arms, wrapped in a faded blanket with little ducks on it. She wasn't crying, she wasn't begging, she wasn't stealing, she was asking. The room grew still. A few forks paused midair. A waiter took a step forward, ready to act, but Miles raised one hand slightly, stopping him. His eyes met the girl's. She looked exhausted, yes. But there was something more. A quiet strength. A deep, unshakable love in the way she held her baby close, shielding him from the world. Her coat was thin, her sneakers soaked from the rain, and the baby's cheeks were red from the cold. But she stood tall. I'm sorry, she added quickly. I just thought maybe just a few bites for him. Miles's throat tightened. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, slowly, he pushed the untouched plate forward. "Take it," he said softly. The girl didn't rush. She didn't grab. Instead, she reached into a worn cloth bag and pulled out a clean napkin. With gentle care, she wrapped the food piece by piece, as though it were something precious. Then she knelt on one knee, pulled a small plastic spoon from her coat, and carefully blew on a bite before feeding it to her baby. The child, barely 9 months old, Miles guessed, opened his mouth eagerly. The moment the spoon touched his tongue, he let out a small coo, a sound of pure delight. His round cheeks lifted in a smile that made the room feel warmer. Miles couldn't look away. That smile, so innocent, so full of light, hit him like a wave. His fingers curled slightly on the edge of the table. It reminded him of Rose's laugh, the way her eyes used to shine when she was just a toddler. The young woman stayed quiet, feeding her son slowly, spoonful by spoonful. She never looked up, never noticed the silent stares around her. All her focus was on the baby. The room faded away. It was as if only the two of them existed. Miles felt something stir in his chest. Not pity, not guilt, but recognition. He was watching something sacred, a kind of love that didn't ask for anything, a kind of love that simply gave. When the baby's tiny belly was full, The girl wrapped the leftovers carefully and tucked them into her bag. She adjusted the blanket around the child, who was already drifting to sleep. Then she looked up at Miles. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. She just nodded. Once. Slowly. A nod that said more than words ever could. And then she turned and walked out into the rainy night. Miles sat there, frozen. The warmth of the plate still lingered on the table, now empty. The candle beside him flickered gently, casting shadows on the linen. He didn't understand what had just happened. But for the first time in years, he felt something. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud, but it was real. And it wouldn't let go. The rain had lightened, now only a gentle mist floating through the cold night air. But Miles Harwood stood just outside the veranda, unmoving. The memory of the girl and her baby lingered like a ghost. He didn't understand it. Something inside him had shifted. He had handed away his untouched meal. Yes. But it wasn't the food he kept thinking about. It was her eyes. The way she had looked at him, calm, steady, tired, but not broken. And the way she held her baby, as though that tiny boy was the only thing keeping her upright in the world. Miles found himself walking. Not quickly, not with a plan. Just following. He spotted her half a block away, turning down a side street, the baby nestled in her arms. She didn't look back. She didn't rush. But there was a carefulness in her steps, like someone who had learned not to trust shadows. The street narrowed. Old buildings on each side leaned in close, their windows dark. At the far end, beside a crumbling brick wall, sat an old green van with peeling paint and a cracked windshield. She opened the back door and climbed inside. Miles stayed hidden behind a tree. He didn't want to scare her. He just watched. Inside, the van, soft light spilled from a battery-powered lamp hanging from the ceiling. The girl pulled off her damp coat and gently laid the baby on a thin blanket. She reached into a small box, pulled out a toy, just a little plush duck with one eye, and set it beside the child. Then she began to hum. The melody was slow, tender, familiar, a lullaby. Her voice was quiet but full of warmth. Miles stood in the rain listening, feeling something stir that hadn't moved in years. She rocked the baby gently, whispering words only he could hear. And Miles, who had spent 10 years building walls of silence around his grief, suddenly felt like those walls were cracking. He couldn't walk away. So the next morning, before sunrise, he came back. He carried a thermos of hot soup, a soft new blanket, and a note he never ended up writing. He left the items beside the van and walked away. No one saw him. But the next day, he returned again, with baby wipes, a pack of clean diapers, and a tiny bottle of baby shampoo. Still, he left no name, no message, only quiet help. Every morning, he passed by the van. Sometimes it was empty. Sometimes he saw her inside rocking the baby or folding laundry, but he never interrupted. Then one evening, just after sunset, he found the courage to knock on the van's door. She opened it slowly, her eyes wary. "It's you," she said, surprised but not afraid. Miles nodded, unsure what to say. "I hope. It's okay. I've been leaving a few things." She looked down, then up again. "I figured it was you." He stood awkwardly, hands in his coat pockets. "I didn't mean to bother you." "You didn't." She paused. "You helped." A moment passed between them. Then she opened the door wider. "Do you want to sit?" Miles hesitated, then stepped inside. The space was small but neat. A few bags stacked in one corner, baby bottles washed and drying on a towel. The baby, Eli, she said, was asleep in a little basket padded with old pillows. His tiny hand clutched a corner of the new blanket. "I'm Nina," she said, settling into the front seat. "Miles," he replied. They sat in silence for a bit, listening to the soft breathing of the child. "I used to study early childhood care," Nina said suddenly. "Wanted to be a preschool teacher. But then I got pregnant and everything changed. Miles listened, not interrupting. Eli's dad left before he was born. My parents didn't take it well. They told me to leave. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Said I was on my own if I made that choice. He said nothing, only nodded slowly. I've been working odd jobs, cleaning houses, handing out flyers. Some nights we sleep in parking lots, others we just drive around until he falls asleep. She looked down at her hands. Last night, I just wanted him to have something warm. Not me, just him. Miles swallowed. I know. They sat quietly for a while. Why did you follow me? She asked, not accusingly, just curious. I don't know, he said truthfully. I think I just needed to understand. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were not hard, but cautious, protective. Then she turned her gaze back to Eli. Most people walk away, she said. They look, but they don't really see us. I saw you, Miles said softly. The lamp in the van flickered slightly. Outside, the night grew colder, but inside, the silence wasn't so heavy anymore. When Miles left that night, he glanced back one last time. Nina was singing again, her voice drifting through the cool air like a soft thread pulling him forward. The question still lingered in his mind, not just about her, but about himself. Why had he followed? And why, for the first time in a decade, did he feel like he was finally waking up? The days had turned colder. The wind bit a little sharper and the city's lights flickered through the early evening mist. Nina wrapped baby Eli in 2 blankets now, just to be sure. He had been fussy all day. He cried when she tried to feed him, his little hands warm and his face flushed. By the time the sun had disappeared behind the tall buildings, Eli's breathing had changed. Quicker, shallower. Nina pressed her hand to his forehead. Burning. Her heart jumped. She didn't panic, easily, not after everything they'd already been through, but this was different. This wasn't just a bad night. He was getting worse. She tried to keep calm as she wiped his face and rocked him gently. It's okay, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Mama's here. But Eli didn't settle. His tiny body trembled. His cries turned weak. Nina's mind raced. She grabbed her coat, wrapped Eli tightly, and climbed into the front seat of the van. The engine groaned before it started, but she didn't wait for it to warm up. She drove through the streets, like someone chasing time, barely noticing the glowing lights or the honking cars, her eyes stung with tears. She arrived at the closest hospital, rushed through the sliding doors, and stood at the front desk. The woman behind the counter barely looked up. My baby has a fever. He's not responding. Please, I need help. Do you have insurance? The woman asked flatly. Nina hesitated, then shook her head. No, but he's very sick. Please. The receptionist gave a tired sigh. We're full right now. You can wait or try another facility. He has a fever of 104, Nina cried. He's burning up. Ma'am, I'm sorry. That's the policy. Nina backed away, holding Eli tightly. His cries had gone silent. That silence scared her more than anything else. She stepped outside into the freezing night. Her hands were shaking. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her old phone. The screen was cracked. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. Then, she typed just 2 words. Help us. She didn't know if Miles would answer, but she had nothing else. 6 minutes later, a black SUV came speeding around the corner and stopped hard at the curb. Miles jumped out before the engine had even stopped. His coat flared behind him as he ran to her. Give him to me, he said, reaching out. She didn't hesitate. She placed Eli in his arms, and the baby, weak but awake, wrapped his small hand around Miles's finger like he remembered him. Miles didn't ask questions. He walked into the hospital, eyes blazing. At the front desk, he didn't wait in line. This baby needs a doctor now, he said, voice calm but firm. I'll pay every cent, but if you delay one more second, I'll buy this hospital and fire every person in this building." The woman blinked, then called for a nurse. Ely was taken in immediately. Nina sat in the hallway, her head in her hands, shaking from fear and cold. Miles sat beside her without a word, just being there. A nurse came out an hour later. "He's stable," she said gently. "We're going to keep him overnight to monitor, but he's doing okay." Nina let out a breath so deep she nearly collapsed. She leaned into Miles, eyes full of tears. "You came," she whispered. He nodded. "Of course I did." For the first time in a long time, Nina allowed herself to cry. Really cry. She didn't have to be strong, not in that moment. And for Miles, holding her close didn't feel like guilt. It felt like peace. By morning, someone had snapped a photo. Miles exiting the hospital, holding baby Eli in his arms. Nina walking beside him. Her coat still wet, her eyes tired, but her hand resting gently on the baby's back. By noon, the photo was everywhere. Mystery Girl and her baby. Who is the woman seen with reclusive architect Miles Harwood? Some praised him. Others attacked her. Gold digger, one headline said. Planned from the start, another guessed. In her apartment, Nina sat in the dark. Her phone screen lit up with words that stung like glass. She turned it off. She didn't cry, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. When Miles arrived that evening, she was quiet. "I can't do this," she said. "I don't want Eli growing up in this mess." "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "They already decided who I am," she whispered. Miles looked at her and said, "Then let's show them who you really are." The next night he went live on national television. No publicist, no script. Just him, sitting under soft lights, with the truth. He started with his story, losing Claire and Rose, living in silence, forgetting how to feel. Then he talked about Nina. She didn't ask for charity, he said. She just wanted her child to be warm and fed. She didn't take from me. She gave me something back, a reason to care, a reason to be alive again. His voice shook. His eyes welled. Nina is not a headline, she's a mother. And Eli is not a story, he's a child, and they saved me. His words were simple, honest, and they worked. The next morning, the noise began to quiet. People started defending her, sharing their stories, praising her strength. One woman started a fundraiser for struggling mothers. Nina didn't speak to the press, but she smiled, just a little, when she saw the world beginning to listen. And Miles? He looked at her differently now, not with pity, but with something closer to awe. A soft wind moved through the trees as the last leaves of autumn danced across the sidewalk. The city had started to slow down. Nights came earlier. The air smelled like rain and chimney smoke. Inside a modest apartment on the third floor of a quiet brick building, Nina stood at the window, rocking Eli gently. He had just turned 1. His hair had grown in golden curls, and he could now say a few clear words. Mama, duck, and his favorite, up. The apartment wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with second-hand furniture. But to Nina, it felt like a palace. It was warm, safe, quiet. It was the first home that didn't come with the fear of someone knocking on her van window to tell her to move along. Miles had found the place, but he hadn't forced anything on her. He simply handed her the keys and said, "It's yours, no conditions." He visited often. Every morning he brought fresh coffee and groceries, always careful not to make it feel like charity. Eli would squeal with excitement when he saw him, arms reaching out, his giggle echoing through the apartment. And Miles had changed. The lines on his face were softer now. He laughed more, even if quietly. He had started designing again. Nothing major, just sketches and small projects. But his hands were no longer idle and his eyes no longer empty. Still, there were questions they hadn't answered. What were they to each other? Were they just 2 people who had shared pain, or were they building something more? They never rushed it, never labeled it. They just kept showing up. Until one day a letter arrived. It was slid under Nina's door, the envelope thin and plain, her name written carefully on the front. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was familiar. Small, neat. Her mother's. Nina, if there is still a way to be part of Eli's life, I'd like to try. I know I've done wrong. I was scared. But I don't want to miss any more time. I hope there's still space for forgiveness. Her hands shook. She sat down, the letter crumpling softly in her lap. She didn't cry. She just stared at the paper for a long time. When Miles arrived that evening, she handed it to him without a word. He read it, then looked at her. How do you feel? I don't know, she said. He didn't push. He just sat beside her and waited. Finally, she said, I'm angry, but Eli deserves to know where he came from, even if it's not perfect. Miles nodded. Then let's go. 3 days later, they drove to a small town 2 hours from the city. The streets were quiet, lined with trees and fading memories. Nina's old neighborhood hadn't changed much. Her parents' house was still there, white paint peeling, porch light glowing. She stood outside for a long time, Eli on her hip. His small hand tugged at her sweater, his face curious but calm. Miles stayed back, giving her space. The door opened. Her mother stood there, older than Nina remembered. She looked tired, but her eyes were full of something else. Hope. They didn't rush into each other's arms. They didn't say everything at once, but when her mother said, "May I hold him?" Nina nodded. Eli didn't pull away. He just stared at the stranger holding him with wide eyes. Then he smiled. That was all it took to begin. Inside, they sat, at the same kitchen table where Nina had once done homework, eaten cereal and cried after school dances. Her father joined them, quiet but kind. He bounced Eli on his knee, whispering silly songs that made the baby giggle. Nina didn't forgive them all at once, but she let the door open, just a little. And that was enough. A year passed. The news stories faded. The gossip vanished. What remained was a simple life. Nina found work at a daycare. She loved being around children, and the other teachers respected her. Miles kept sketching, sometimes designing small homes for single mothers through a local nonprofit. They didn't rush into romance, but every moment brought them closer. And one bright spring morning under a wide blue sky, something shifted for good. They returned to the park where it had all started. The park just across from the bistro, where once a girl had whispered a simple question over a stranger's dinner. Now, there was a picnic blanket, a few close friends, and Eli, toddling through the grass in a little suit holding something in both hands. A small velvet box. He brought it to Miles, who knelt down, took it, and smiled. Then he stood. Nina stood across from him in a soft white dress, her hair loose and blowing in the wind. She wasn't dressed for a fairy tale. She was dressed for now, for truth. Miles opened the box and said quietly, "You didn't ask me for anything, not once. And yet, you gave me everything." He looked down at Eli, who now clung to his leg. "You gave me a reason to live again, to love, to believe in more than silence." His voice trembled. "Nina, will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears, nodding. Yes. They didn't need music. They didn't need cameras. They just needed each other. And as Eli wrapped his arms around both of them and whispered one small word, "Home," the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself were listening, because that was the ending no one saw coming. Not riches, not fame, just family, born not from blood, but from love.